The first time Grandma Vi pointed at me across a table loaded down with fried chicken and butter beans and said that sentence, I nearly choked on a biscuit hard enough to require medical intervention from a woman who happened to be a nurse. That's the one, she said, one crooked finger aimed straight at my chest like she was marking me for something official. That's the one she prays for. The table went quiet the way a room goes quiet right before something breaks. Aunt Reese stopped mid-pour with the sweet tea pitcher hovering over an empty glass. Uncle Carl looked up from his plate like he'd just heard his name called in a courtroom. And Delilah Monroe, my best friend of 6 years, the woman I had eaten approximately 1,100 meals across from and never once let myself think about the way I was currently thinking about her, went the color of the tomatoes on her own plate. Grandma, she said, in the tight, pleading voice of someone trying to talk a toddler out of announcing something in public. Grandma, please. What? I'm old. I say what I see. Grandma Vi picked her fork back up like she hadn't just detonated a small emotional bomb over the cornbread. Every night, on her knees, this one prays. You think I don't hear her through the wall? Lord, watch over Jonah. Lord, keep Jonah safe. Lord, if it's not too much trouble, make that boy notice what's right in front of him. I need to back up here, because you deserve context before I let you sit with the image of an 81-year-old woman in a house dress, ending my ability to function like a normal adult male. My name is Jonah Reyes. I'm 26. I teach 11th grade U.S. history at a public school in Savannah, Georgia, and I own exactly one tie that doesn't have a pattern on it that my students describe as unhinged. I grade papers with a red pen my grandfather left me. I drink my coffee black because cream feels like a personality I haven't earned, and until the night in question, I would have told you, under oath, with my hand on a Bible, that Delilah Monroe and I were just friends. Best friends. The kind of friends who have a system. The kind of friends who know exactly how the other one takes their eggs, who show up at 2 in the morning without being asked, who have a shared understanding that Sunday dinner at Grandma Vi's house is not optional. It is a covenant. I met Lila. Everybody calls her Lila. Delilah is what her grandmother uses when she's either proud of her or about to publicly humiliate her. And honestly, there's rarely a difference. In a college study group, for a biology class neither of us needed for our majors, and both of us were failing anyway. She was pre-nursing. I was pre-history teacher, which is a fancier way of saying pre-broke. She showed up to our first study session with color-coded flashcards and an energy drink the size of a fire extinguisher, looked at my notes, looked at me, and said, "Who hurt you? These are illegible." I told her my handwriting was a war crime, and she agreed, and that was more or less the whole foundation of our friendship right there. She fixed things. I made her laugh. It worked. 6 years later, she was a pediatric nurse at the Children's Hospital downtown. I was 3 miles away trying to convince 16-year-olds that the Louisiana Purchase mattered, and somewhere in the middle of all that, without either of us clocking exactly when it happened, Sunday dinner at her grandmother's house had become the fixed point of my entire week. It happened gradually, the way most important things do. First, it was just an invitation, tossed out casually after a study session sophomore year, when Lila found out I was planning to spend Thanksgiving break alone in my dorm because flights home to my family in Texas cost more than my entire textbook budget. She didn't ask if I wanted to come. She informed me, the way she informs people of most things, that I would be at her grandmother's table at 2 o'clock sharp on Thursday, and that showing up empty-handed would be considered a personal insult to a woman who had survived one husband, 4 children, in the entire 20th century. I showed up with a pecan pie I'd bought at a grocery store and tried, unsuccessfully, to pass off as homemade. Grandma Vi took one bite, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Boy, I have made pie for 81 years. Don't you dare try that again." Then she put a second slice on my plate anyway and told me to come back next week. I came back next week, and the week after that, and eventually there was no week I didn't come back. Until next week stopped being a question either of us bothered asking and just became a fact of both our lives, like gravity, or the particular way the pecan tree in the backyard dropped nuts onto the tin roof of the shed every October and scared the daylights out of anyone who wasn't used to it. Somewhere in there, Lila became the person I called first with good news and the only person I called at all with bad news. She became the person who knew, without being told, that I got quiet and short-tempered on the anniversary of my grandfather's death, and who would show up at my apartment on that exact day every year with takeout and absolutely no questions, just company. I became the person who fixed the garbage disposal at her first apartment 3 times before finally admitting neither of us knew what we were doing and calling an actual plumber. I became the person who sat in the parking lot of her nursing school at 6 in the morning with 2 coffees on the worst day of her boards, not saying anything useful, just being present, because sometimes presence is the only useful thing a person can offer. We built an entire language together over those years. Inside jokes that took 4 sentences to explain to anyone else and meant everything to us in half a word. A rhythm to our friendship so steady that neither of us noticed, for a long time, that it had quietly become the architecture the rest of our lives were built around. Every important decision either of us made in those 6 years got run past the other one first. Every apartment I considered renting, she toured with me. Every difficult shift she survived at the hospital, I heard about before her own mother did. It should have been obvious, looking back. It should have been obvious to both of us long before an 81-year-old woman had to say it out loud over fried chicken. But that's the strange, stubborn thing about loving your best friend. The closer you already are, the harder it is to imagine there's a door left to walk through, because you've spent years convinced you're already standing in the room you were always meant to end up in. I want to be honest with you about something, because if I'm not honest here, none of the rest of this story makes sense. I had noticed Lila. I had noticed her for a long time. I noticed the little hum she does under her breath when she's concentrating on something, completely unaware she's doing it. I noticed the way she talks to elderly patients' families on the phone, patient and warm, like she has all the time in the world even when she doesn't. I noticed that she remembers everything. My mother's chemo scare 4 years ago, the exact day my dad stopped drinking, the fact that I hate cilantro with a passion most people reserve for tax season. I noticed all of it, filed it away under a heading in my brain labeled "Do Not Open," and kept right on showing up every Sunday like a man who had made peace with wanting something he had decided not to have. Because here's the thing nobody warns you about with best friends. You can build an entire life around someone without ever admitting what kind of life it actually is. We had inside jokes older than some marriages. We had a group chat with her grandmother in it, which is its own kind of relationship status. We had a standing rule, established the year we turned 23 after a mutual friend's disastrous wedding, that we would never, under any circumstances, date each other, because, and this was Lila's phrasing, delivered while slightly drunk on champagne and stepping on my foot in heels, we're too important to risk on romance, Jonah. Romance is temporary. This is not. I had agreed with her. Loudly. Convincingly. I had believed it. Mostly, the way you believe something you've said enough times that it stops needing to be examined. Then her grandmother pointed a fork at me over fried chicken and told an entire dining room that Lila prayed for me every night. And every carefully filed piece of denial I'd been stacking for 6 years came crashing down at once. "Grandma," Lila said again, standing up so fast her chair scraped the floor. "I need to check on the peach cobbler." "The cobbler's fine, baby. It's in the oven. It can't run off." Grandma Vi did not look away from me. Her eyes were sharp behind her glasses, the particular sharp of a woman who has buried a husband, raised 4 children, and does not have time left in her life to watch 2 young fools dance around the obvious. "I'm just saying what's true. She thinks I don't know. I know everything in this house. I knew Reese was pregnant with the twins before Reese knew." "That's true," Aunt Reese said quietly. "She did. I know when the mail's coming before it comes," Grandma Vi went on. "I know Carl's been sneaking cigarettes in the garage, even though his heart doctor told him not to." "Mama," Uncle Carl said, mortified. "And I know," she said, finally turning her fork toward Lila now. gentler this time, that my granddaughter has been in love with this boy since before she'd admit it to her own reflection. So somebody in this family needed to say it, because Lord knows the two of you were fixing to take it to your graves out of stubbornness. Lila did not go check on the cobbler. She stood frozen by her chair with both hands pressed flat against the table like she needed it to remain standing. And when she finally looked at me, there was nothing in her face I recognized from 6 years of friendship. It was raw in a way I'd never seen on her, scared and exposed and daring me, all at once, to say something back. I want to tell you I said the right thing immediately. I want to tell you I stood up, crossed that dining room, and said something so perfect it belongs on a greeting card. What actually happened is I sat there with a piece of cornbread halfway to my mouth, staring at the woman I had spent 6 years pretending not to love, while her entire extended family watched us like we were the Sunday matinee. I have to go check the cobbler, Lila said a third time, and this time she actually left, disappearing into the kitchen so fast her chair was still rocking behind her. Grandma Vi looked at me over the top of her glasses. Well, she said, go on then. Go on where? Boy, I did not raise a child who moves this slow, and neither did her mother, God rest her. Go. I went. The kitchen in Grandma Vi's house has been the same kitchen for as long as I've known this family. Yellow curtains her late husband hung in 1987 that nobody has the heart to replace. A stove that ticks when it heats up. A window over the sink that looks out onto a backyard with one enormous pecan tree Lila used to climb as a kid, according to roughly 400 stories I'd been told over the years, each one slightly different depending on how much sweet tea had been involved in the telling. Lila was standing at that window with her back to the door, both hands braced on the counter, staring out at that tree like it owed her an explanation. Hey, I said. Don't, she said, without turning around. Whatever you're about to say, don't say it out of pity. I mean it, Jonah. I will actually leave the country. I wasn't going to say anything out of pity. You don't know what you were going to say. You've had 4 seconds to think of something. I've had 6 years, I said, and that got her to turn around. She looked at me like she wasn't sure she'd heard me correctly, which, fair, because I wasn't entirely sure I'd meant to say it out loud. But it was out now, hanging in a kitchen that smelled like fried chicken and cobbler and 40 years of Sunday dinners, and I found I didn't particularly want to take it back. 6 years, she repeated slowly. Give or take. That's not. Jonah, that's not funny. I'm not joking. I stepped further into the kitchen, close enough now that I could see her hands were trembling slightly against the counter behind her. I have not been joking about you since roughly the 2nd month we knew each other, when you told me my flashcards were a war crime, and I decided that was the funniest thing anyone had ever said to me. And then I spent the next 6 years trying to convince myself that finding someone funny wasn't the same thing as being in love with them. You made a rule, she said, but it came out shakier than she probably wanted. You agreed to the rule. Romance is temporary. This is not, remember? You said that rule was smart. You said, Jonah, you said it in front of witnesses. I said a lot of things at that wedding. I also cried during the father-daughter dance for a man I have never met. So my judgment that night was compromised. That got a small, watery laugh out of her, which felt like the first real progress of the last 90 seconds. Your grandmother just told the entire family you pray for me, I said. Every night. Her face went scarlet again. I'm going to move to another state. Is it true? She didn't answer right away. She looked down at the floor, then back up at me, and something in her expression shifted from panic to something closer to resigned, like she'd finally run out of room to keep dodging. Yes, she said quietly. It's true. I don't pray about a lot of things, Jonah. I'm not that kind of praying person. My grandmother would tell you I'm barely a praying person at all, but you I pray about. Every single night since your dad's surgery 2 years ago, when you called me at 11 at night, and I could hear in your voice that you were trying not to fall apart, and I got in my car and drove to the hospital and sat with you until 4 in the morning, and somewhere around 2 a.m. I realized I wasn't there because you were my best friend. I was there because I couldn't have survived not being there. And that terrified me so much that I have spent every day since then pretending it didn't happen. I stood in that kitchen and felt every excuse I'd built over 6 years quietly collapse. I remember that night, I said. I remember you brought me a coffee I didn't ask for and sat in a plastic chair for 5 hours without complaining once. And I remember thinking, this is the kind of person people write songs about. And then I remember deciding not to think about it again because we had a rule. The rule was stupid. The rule was self-preservation, I said. I was scared, Lila. I've been scared for 6 years. You are the best thing in my life, and the idea of risking that on something that could go wrong. I told myself it was noble. I told myself I was protecting us. Really, I was just a coward wearing a nice shirt. You do own one nice shirt. I'm wearing it right now, actually. She laughed again, more solid this time, and some of the tension went out of her shoulders. This is insane, she said. My grandmother just publicly outed my feelings over fried chicken. In her defense, she seemed pretty confident about it. She's been saying it for a year. Quietly. To my mother, to my aunt. I kept telling her she was wrong. Lila shook her head, half laughing, half something closer to tears. I genuinely thought I was hiding it well. You were not hiding it well. Excuse me? You steal my fries every single time we eat together, and then act personally offended if I try to steal yours back. You call me before you tell anyone else good news. You have a folder on your phone, I've seen it, labeled Jonah stuff, full of pictures you've taken of me without me knowing, mostly of me sleeping on your couch, which honestly borders on surveillance. That folder is private. It has 312 photos in it. Lila, that's not a folder. That's a shrine. Okay, fine. Maybe I wasn't hiding it as well as I thought I was, she admitted, cheeks pink. But you're one to talk. You show up here every single Sunday, even on weeks you have 100 essays to grade. You once drove 40 minutes in the rain because I said I had a headache and might want soup. You know my coffee order better than I know my coffee order. You remember every single one of my patients' names, Jonah, kids you have never met, because I mentioned them once and you file it away like it matters to you. It does matter to me. Everything about you matters to me. That's kind of the whole problem. The kitchen went quiet except for the tick of that old stove and, faintly, through the door, the murmur of her entire family very obviously not eavesdropping, while very obviously eavesdropping. So Lila said softly, "What do we do with that?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I've never done this part before. The part where I say it out loud instead of writing it in a mental folder I never open." "We could not do anything," she offered, though her voice cracked slightly on the words. "We could go back out there, eat cobbler, pretend Grandma I didn't just rearrange both our lives in one sentence, and keep being exactly what we've been for 6 years. Do you want that?" "No," she said immediately, no hesitation this time. "God, no. I'm exhausted, Jonah. I'm exhausted from pretending. I'm tired of driving home after every Sunday dinner wondering if tonight's the night you'll finally look at me the way I keep hoping you will, and then getting home and being disappointed in myself for hoping at all. I don't want to do that anymore." "Then don't," I said. "Neither do I." I reached out and took her hand, the same way I'd taken it 100 times before across restaurant tables and movie theater armrests and hospital waiting rooms, except this time it wasn't casual. This time it was a question, and she answered it by lacing her fingers through mine and stepping closer. "If we do this," she said, quiet and careful, "and it doesn't work, I lose everything, Jonah. Not just a boyfriend. I lose my best friend. I lose Sunday dinners feeling normal. I lose the person who knows every single thing about me. That's not a small risk. I know. I need you to actually know it. Not just say the words. I know it," I said, and meant it with everything I had. I've known it for 6 years, which is exactly why I never said anything. But I'd rather risk losing you as a friend trying to have all of you than spend the rest of my life keeping you at a safe distance and calling it loyalty. Her eyes filled, and this time she didn't try to blink it away. "That's a very good line," she whispered. "Did you practice that?" "I've had 6 years to practice." "Shut up," she said, laughing through the tears now. And then she closed the distance between us and kissed me in her grandmother's kitchen, underneath yellow curtains from 1987, with the smell of fried chicken and peach cobbler thick in the air. and her whole family very badly pretending not to listen on the other side of a swinging door. It was not a careful kiss. It was 6 years of restraint breaking apart at once, her hand fisting in the front of my one nice shirt, mine coming up to cradle the back of her neck like I'd been waiting my whole life to have permission to do exactly that. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathing unevenly, she pressed her forehead to mine and let out a small, disbelieving laugh. "We're going to have to go back out there," she said. "I know. My grandmother is going to be insufferable. I know that too. She's going to bring this up at every holiday for the rest of our lives." "Lila," I said, "your grandmother just publicly announced our entire relationship before we'd even had it. I think insufferable ship has sailed." The swinging door creaked open at that exact moment, and Grandma Vi stood there with her hands on her hips and the smug expression of a woman who had just won a bet nobody else knew she'd made. "Cobbler's getting cold," she announced, eyeing our joined hands with open satisfaction. "And somebody owes me $20. Reese bet me it'd take till Christmas." "Grandma," Lila groaned, mortified all over again. "You bet on us?" "Baby, the whole family's been betting on you too since your cousin's graduation party. Carl had you at Thanksgiving. I said tonight." She turned and hollered back into the dining room. "Reese, pay up." I looked at Lila. She looked at me. And despite the very real, very public humiliation unfolding around us, I had never in my life felt more certain about anything. "Welcome to the family," she said dryly. "Officially, I guess. I've been coming to Sunday dinner for 6 years, Lila. I think I was already family." "Yeah," she said, softer now, squeezing my hand. "I guess you kind of were." We walked back into that dining room together, hand in hand, into a chorus of applause and Uncle Carl grumbling about losing his bet and Aunt Reese doing a small victory dance with her $20, and Grandma Vi sitting back down at the head of the table like a woman who had simply been waiting, patiently, for the rest of us to catch up to what she'd known all along. We didn't leave Grandma Vi's that night without one more small ambush, because apparently the universe had decided one life-altering announcement per evening wasn't sufficient. As I was walking Lila out to her car, Aunt Reese caught up with us on the porch, $20 still clutched triumphantly in one hand, and informed us both that Sunday dinner next week would be a normal dinner, nothing special, no pressure, in the exact tone of a woman who had already started planning an engagement party in her head. "She's going to be insufferable for months," Lila said, once we were finally alone in the driveway, leaning against her car door with the porch light catching gold in her hair. "Your whole family's going to be insufferable for months. You're part of my whole family now. That includes you." She smiled up at me, still a little disbelieving, like she expected the last hour to dissolve if she looked away too long. "So, what happens now?" "Now," I said, "I'd like to take you on an actual date. Not a Sunday dinner with your entire extended family watching. Just us." "Jonah Reyes, are you asking me out after 6 years of friendship and one dramatic kitchen confession?" "I'm aware of the redundancy. I'm asking anyway." She kissed me again, slower this time. No audience except the porch light and a chorus of cicadas going in the trees. "Pick me up Friday," she said against my mouth. "Wear the nice shirt." "It's my only nice shirt." "I'm aware. Wear it anyway." Friday came, and I picked her up at 7 with a bouquet of sunflowers because she'd once mentioned, 3 years earlier, in an offhand comment I apparently filed away without either of us realizing it, that roses felt like a cliché and sunflowers felt like they meant it. She opened her apartment door in a green dress I'd never seen before, hair down instead of in the practical ponytail she wore for 12-hour hospital shifts, and I stood there on her doorstep holding flowers like a teenager, genuinely unable to remember how words worked. "You're staring," she said. "I'm recalibrating. 6 years of seeing you in scrubs did not prepare me for this. Careful. Compliments before dinner make me suspicious of your motives." "My motives are extremely honorable. I intend to feed you an overpriced meal and then kiss you goodnight on your own porch like a gentleman." "That's the least honorable plan I've ever heard," she said, laughing. taking the sunflowers from my hands and pressing a kiss to my cheek before pulling me inside to find a vase. Dinner that night was at a small seafood place downtown we'd eaten at dozens of times before as friends, splitting appetizers and arguing over the check. Except this time I paid without asking, and she let me. And this time when her foot found mine under the table, neither of us pretended it was an accident. We talked, as we always did, easily and endlessly. Except now there was an undercurrent to everything, a new frequency running beneath 6 years of familiar conversation. When she reached across the table to steal a shrimp off my plate, the way she'd done 100 times before, I caught her wrist instead of swatting her hand away, and the look that passed between us said more than either of us had managed to say out loud in 6 years combined. "This is strange," she admitted, halfway through dessert, one shared piece of key lime pie sitting between us with 2 forks. "Good strange. But strange. I keep waiting for it to feel different than it does, and it just feels like us. Except now I'm allowed to want it to be us. I keep waiting for you to wake up and realize this was all a fever dream brought on by your grandmother's cooking. My grandmother's cooking has never once caused a fever dream. It has caused 3 documented cases of Sunday afternoon food comas, but never a fever dream. Fair distinction." She reached for my hand across the table, lacing our fingers together the way she had in her grandmother's kitchen, except this time it wasn't a question anymore. It was simply a fact, the newest and best fact in a friendship built on 6 years of facts we'd both been too careful to name. That was 6 months ago. I wish I could tell you everything after that was easy. That Grandma Vi's declaration solved every complication that comes with turning 6 years of friendship into something new. But that's not how real love works, and I'd be lying to you if I said otherwise. The first real test came about 7 weeks in, when Lila got a phone call that changed the shape of everything. She'd been offered a position at a specialized pediatric cardiac unit in Atlanta. Not just any position, the kind of role nurses spend entire careers hoping to be considered for, working under one of the top pediatric cardiologists in the Southeast, with a pay increase that would have made anyone's decision easy if love hadn't been sitting in the middle of it. She told me about it on a Tuesday night, sitting cross-legged on my couch with a takeout container balanced on her knee, and I watched her go quiet in a way I'd learned, over 6 years and then 7 new weeks, to recognize as her bracing for a fight that hadn't happened yet. "Atlanta's 3 hours away," I said carefully, once she'd finished explaining the offer. "I know. That's not exactly commuting distance." "I know that too, Jonah." She set the container down, suddenly not hungry anymore. "I haven't said yes. I wanted to talk to you first. You don't need my permission to take the best opportunity of your career. I'm not asking for permission. I'm asking for a conversation. There's a difference." She pulled her knees up to her chest, a habit I recognized from years of watching her get defensive before she even knew she was doing it. "I've wanted this specific kind of position since nursing school. It's not just money, Jonah, it's the work. Kids with congenital heart defects. Kids who need someone who actually understands the specialty instead of general peds. This is the job I've been building toward for years." "Then take it." "It's not that simple, and you know it isn't. We just started this. Actually started it. I mean, not the 6 years of pretending. We've had it for 7 weeks. And I'm supposed to just, what, drive 3 hours every weekend? Do long distance while we're still figuring out what we even are to each other?" I understood, watching her, that this wasn't really about the job. Not entirely. It was about the same fear that had kept both of us silent for 6 years, just wearing a different outfit this time. The fear that wanting something, a career, a person, a future, meant you were setting yourself up to lose it. "Can I tell you something honest?" I said. "Please." My first instinct, the second you said Atlanta, was panic. Real, ugly panic. Some small selfish part of me wanted to ask you to turn it down. To stay here, stay close, keep everything exactly the way it's been since Grandma Vi rearranged our lives with a fried chicken leg. That's actually kind of flattering. It's not, though, because it's not fair to you. I don't get to ask you to shrink your whole career because I'm scared of what distance might do to something that's 7 weeks old. That's not love, Lila. That's fear pretending to be love. And I promised myself I was done doing that the day I finally told you the truth in your grandmother's kitchen. Her expression softened, some of the defensiveness leaving her shoulders. So what are you actually saying? I'm saying take the job if it's the job you want. We'll figure out the rest. 3 hours isn't nothing, but it's not forever either. And I refuse to be the reason you don't become exactly the nurse you've spent your whole career trying to be. You'd really do that? Long distance, all of it. I do considerably harder things than that for you, I said. I sat through your cousin's entire 11-hour destination wedding without complaint. I think I can handle a 3-hour drive. She laughed, but her eyes were wet, and she crossed the couch to fold herself into my arms, tucking her face against my neck the way she'd started doing in the past 7 weeks, like she was finally allowed to. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. Not of the distance. Of what happens if the distance changes how you feel. It won't. You can't promise that. No, I agreed. But I can promise I'm going to try harder than I've ever tried at anything, because I spent 6 years being too scared to have you at all, and I am not giving up something I finally have just because it gets complicated. She was quiet for a long moment, breathing slow against my shoulder, and then she said, I haven't accepted yet. You should. I know. I think I already decided, honestly. I think I just needed to say it out loud to you first, to see if you'd flinch. Did I flinch? No, she said, lifting her head to look at me, something clear and certain in her expression now. You didn't flinch at all. She accepted the position 2 days later. And I won't pretend the next several months were simple, because they weren't. There were weekends the 3-hour drive felt like nothing, and weekends it felt like an ocean. There was a stretch in month 3 where Lila got so consumed by a difficult case at the hospital, a little girl who reminded her too much of a cousin who'd passed young, that she went quiet on me for 4 days, and I had to learn, in real time, the difference between giving someone space and disappearing on them the way my instincts wanted to. There was also, I'll admit, a moment of genuine jealousy on my part, when a cardiologist named Dr. Grant Whitfield started showing up a little too frequently in her stories from work, always with some new compliment attached. Grant said the way I handled that code was the best he'd seen from a first year. Grant asked me to consult on his research paper. Until one long weekend visit, I finally, clumsily, asked her outright if there was something I needed to worry about. She had looked at me across her small Atlanta apartment kitchen, genuinely startled, and then, once she understood what I was actually asking, not annoyed but tender about it in a way that made me feel foolish and relieved at once. Jonah, she'd said, taking my face in both hands. I drove 3 hours home last weekend in a rainstorm because I missed the sound of your voice enough that a phone call wasn't going to cut it anymore. Grant Whitfield is a brilliant cardiologist and an extremely married man whose husband makes the best banana bread I have ever had in my life. You have genuinely nothing to worry about. I feel very stupid right now. A little bit, yeah, but it's kind of endearing. She'd kissed the corner of my mouth. For what it's worth, I like that you got jealous. It means you actually believe this is real enough to be scared of losing. For the record, I added, still working through the embarrassment, I didn't actually think you'd do anything. I just kept hearing his name, and my brain filled in worst-case scenarios at 2 in the morning while you were 3 hours away, and I was staring at a ceiling fan. That's called anxiety, Jonah, not evidence. I'm aware. It's a very convincing anxiety, though. Come here. She pulled me down onto the couch beside her, tucking herself under my arm the way she'd started doing whenever the visits got too short and neither of us wanted to waste a minute of them sitting apart. You want to know an actual secret about Grant? Do I? He asked me, in my second week, if the guy I kept talking about, because apparently I talk about you constantly at work, which the entire unit has opinions about, was worth uprooting a promising nursing career for a long-distance relationship. And I told him that you'd once sat in a hospital parking lot at 6 in the morning, holding 2 coffees just so I wouldn't have to walk into my board exam alone, and that no career on earth was going to convince me a man like that wasn't worth the drive. I sat with that for a second, feeling considerably less foolish and considerably more grateful. What did he say to that? He said, and I'm quoting directly. Well, that settles that. And then he asked if you had a brother, because his husband apparently likes a good grand gesture, and Grant's romantic instincts peaked somewhere around a nice card on their anniversary. I laughed, the last of the jealousy dissolving into something closer to relief. I really did overreact. You did, but it's a nice kind of overreacting. The kind that tells me you're not taking any of this for granted. She kissed my jaw, soft and quick, which, considering it took 6 years and my grandmother's blunt intervention to get us here, I appreciate more than you probably realize. I've believed that since a woman in a house dress pointed a fork at me. She still brings up that fork, you know. She tells the story at every family gathering now. It's gotten longer each time. Last month she added that she'd had a vision about it in a dream 3 years prior. Your grandmother is a menace. My grandmother, Lila said, smiling, is the reason either of us finally said anything at all. I'd be a little more grateful if I were you. She had a point. I've thought about that a lot since. How close we came to never saying it. 6 years of Sunday dinners. 6 years of careful distance dressed up as friendship. And it took one sharp-eyed 81-year-old woman with absolutely no patience left for either of our nonsense to say the thing out loud that both of us were too scared to say ourselves. The distance lasted 11 months in total. 11 months of 3-hour drives and video calls that ran too late into the night and care packages Lila's grandmother insisted on sending every other week, addressed always to Jonah and Delilah, never just one of us. Like Grandma, I had decided our names belonged together and wasn't interested in revisiting the matter. Then, last spring, a position opened at the same children's hospital where I'd first met Lila, back when we were both students figuring out flashcards and futures we hadn't landed on yet. A position closer to my school, closer to her grandmother's yellow-curtained kitchen, closer to the pecan tree Lila used to climb. She didn't have to apply for it. Atlanta was still hers if she wanted it, the career she'd worked toward, the specialty she loved. She applied anyway. I found out only after she got the offer, because she wanted, she told me later, to make sure it was a decision she was making for herself, and not one she'd talk herself out of the second I found out, and got hopeful. I could have stayed, she said, the night she told me, sitting on the tailgate of my truck outside her grandmother's house. Both of us watching fireflies come up out of the grass the way they had every summer of our whole lives. Atlanta was a good career. A great one, honestly. Why didn't you? Because 11 months of missing you taught me something I probably should have figured out at 20, back when I was making flashcards and pretending I didn't notice you, she said, leaning her head against my shoulder. The job is important. It always will be. But it's not the thing I pray about at night, Jonah. You are. You've been the thing I pray about since before I even had the nerve to admit it to my own grandmother, who, might I remind you, figured it out anyway, because apparently I have never once in my life had a poker face. You really don't, I agreed, wrapping an arm around her. It's part of your charm. I'm choosing home, she said simply. I'm choosing you. Not because I'm scared of distance anymore, but because I finally understand the difference between a good career and the life I actually want to build. I can have both. I just don't want to have them 3 hours apart. I proposed 4 months after that, in the same backyard, under the same pecan tree Lila had been climbing since she was 7 years old, with her entire family somehow crammed onto the back porch pretending they weren't watching, which they absolutely were, because subtlety has never once run in this particular bloodline. Grandma Vi cried before I even got the ring out of my pocket. She told me later she'd known it was coming for 3 weeks because she'd caught me whispering with Uncle Carl about ring sizes, and also because, in her words, she'd had another vision, though by that point none of us were entirely convinced the visions weren't just very good guessing dressed up as prophecy. Delilah Marie Monroe, I said, kneeling in that backyard with fireflies coming up around us, and her whole family sniffling audibly from the porch. I spent 6 years being too scared to tell you the truth, and I am not wasting one more single day being scared of anything that has to do with you. Your grandmother figured out I loved you before I let myself admit it. I'd like to spend the rest of my life making sure everyone else who matters figures it out too. Will you marry me? She said yes before I even finished the sentence, which she still swears wasn't rude. It was efficient, and honestly, after 6 years of waiting, I wasn't about to argue with efficiency. We got married the following spring in that same backyard, under the same tree, with yellow curtains from 1987 hanging in the kitchen window behind us, and Grandma, Vi, sitting in the front row in a dress the exact color of the fried chicken that started this whole thing, looking, for all the world, like a woman who had simply been waiting, very patiently, for everyone else to catch up. The morning of the wedding, before any of the guests arrived, before the folding chairs were even set up in neat rows across the grass, Grandma Vi found me alone in the kitchen, straightening a tie I still hadn't fully learned to knot correctly after 27 years of trying. She didn't say anything at first. She just came and stood beside me, reaching up with both hands to fix the knot herself, the same way she'd probably fixed her own husband's tie 60 years earlier in this exact house. You know, she said, once the tie was finally straight, I wasn't guessing that night. Everybody thinks I was guessing. I figured you had some inside information. She used to talk about you in her sleep, Grandma Vi said, matter of fact, like she was reporting the weather. Back when she'd stay over some weekends, before either of you had the sense God gave you. I'd hear her through the wall. Not words exactly, just your name, over and over, soft, like it was something she was holding on to. A grandmother notices things like that. A grandmother doesn't forget things like that. I didn't have a response ready for that, so I just stood there, feeling something thick gather in my throat. She's had a hard road, some parts of it, Grandma Vi went on, adjusting my jacket collar now, fussing over details that didn't need fussing over, the way people do when they're trying not to cry in front of you. Her mother passing so young. Her daddy never quite the same after. But she's never once had a hard road with you in it, Jonah. Not one single day. I watched that girl walk through this house for 6 years, lighter every single time you were in it, and heavier every single time you left. I wasn't guessing that night. I was just finally tired of watching two grown fools waste good years being scared. Thank you, I said, for saying it before either of us had the nerve to. Somebody had to, she said simply, patting my chest once, firm, final. Now go on. You've got a wedding to get to, and Lord knows that girl's been ready for this a lot longer than either of you admitted. At the reception, she stood up with a glass of sweet tea instead of champagne, because at 82 she decided champagne tasted like regret with bubbles in it, and she raised it toward the two of us at the head table. I want it on record, she announced to the whole room, in the exact tone she'd used the night this all started, that I called it first. Before Reese, before Carl, before either one of these two fools had the sense to admit what was sitting right in front of them. I looked at that boy across my dinner table, and I knew, the way you know weather's coming before the sky changes. That's the one, I said. That's the one she prays for. She looked at me, and then at Lila, and her sharp eyes went soft in a way I'd rarely seen from her. Sometimes, she said, quieter now, just for us, though the whole room heard it anyway. The people who love us can see the truth before we're brave enough to say it out loud ourselves. All I did was say it first. The two of you did the rest. Lila reached for my hand under the table, the same way she had 100 times over the years, except now, it wasn't something we were hiding. It was something we got to have, in front of everyone, for the rest of our lives. To Grandma Vi, I said, lifting my glass, who ruined our best friendship in the best possible way. To Grandma Vi, the whole room echoed, and somewhere near the back, I heard Uncle Carl mutter that he still hadn't forgiven Reese for winning that first bet, which, 6 years and 1 marriage later, remains the single most consistent thing about that entire family. We still go to Sunday dinner every week. Some things don't change just because everything else does. The chicken's still fried the same way it's always been fried. The cobbler's still in the same oven. The yellow curtains are still hanging in that kitchen window, and every single Sunday, without fail, at some point during dinner, Grandma Vi looks at me across the table, points her fork in my direction, and says it again, just to make sure nobody's forgotten. That's the one. That's the one she prays for. And every single time, I look across that table at my wife, at the woman who spent 6 years praying quietly for a future neither of us had the courage to ask for out loud. And I think the same thing I thought the very first time that fork pointed my way. She was right. She was right about all of it. And I will spend every Sunday for the rest of my life being grateful that one sharp-eyed grandmother decided she was done waiting for the rest of us to catch up. What would you have done if your best friend's grandmother pointed you out across the dinner table and told the whole family exactly who her granddaughter prayed for every night? Have you ever had someone else say the thing out loud that you were too scared to admit yourself? Tell your story in the comments. And for those who'd like to be a little closer to us, we've opened memberships where you'll get shorter exclusive stories every week with no ads. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next.